And here we are at the 12:04 mark. So here's the formal welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Counseling Services webinar. My name is Dr. Erin Jeanette. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Tashel Tanis. We are both licensed clinical psychologists, and we staff the counseling service, the student mental health service here at SPS. Our goal is to be here for you in many ways, from individual services to psychoeducational offerings like this. So we're glad to be here with you today talking about something that can affect many of our student lives, test anxiety, and I would say more broadly, performance anxiety of various types. I think this presentation will be applicable to those areas as well. So a few words as we start. Of course, we hope today's presentation will help to make your student life and your general life just a little bit more manageable. You know, life is about kind of gaining skills, learning things, gaining skills in our academic lives and in our wellness lives. Though Dr. Tanis and myself are licensed clinical psychologists, this webinar that we're giving today is educational. It's not individual treatment. It's not group therapy. What we're doing today is psychoeducation, and that's different than receiving psychological services or treatment. So you're attending this webinar or viewing it later when it's posted on the web. That doesn't mean that you're receiving individual or group treatment from SPS Counseling. If you're interested in receiving individual services, you can email us at counseling@sps.cuny.edu and we can set up a consultation to discuss. Those are things that we offer as well. Another note, if you're receiving mental health services off campus, you should always remember that the advice of your healthcare provider always takes precedent over anything that you learn here today. We think we give great advice and great guidance, but if you have a provider, the guidance that they give you is really tailored to your individual needs. We're providing general advice today. So if you notice anything that doesn't feel in keeping with any treatment plan that you might have yourself, that always takes precedence. That said, we do hope that you learned something here today that will help you make your academic life better, smoother, calmer, more manageable. There will be a Q&A period at the end. And if you want, you can just post your questions in the Q&A section at any time. I'll be watching those questions as they come in, and at the end, I'll kind of help pose them to the group so we can all hear. So do put your questions in the Q&A anytime, and there'll be time for us to talk about them at the end. Also, there'll be a little survey at the end where we ask you what you thought of this experience here today, and you can do that by filling out the survey at the end of this webinar. If you stay on till the end, it will also come to you in an email tomorrow, I believe. So you'll have two chances to fill out that survey and to tell us how we did. I think those are all the logistics. And now, Dr. Tanis, please take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tashel. As Dr. Jeanette mentioned, I'm a psychologist in the counseling services. And today we're going to talk about test anxiety. So let me just share my screen really quickly. There we go. All right. So we wanted to talk about test anxiety or offer this, this webinar because exams are just inherently stressful situations, right? And for some people, that stress, that anxiety can really impact your ability to test well. So we're just going to talk about test anxiety, some symptoms, what it is, what causes test anxiety, and then we're really going to go into some ways to hopefully prevent or improve your ability to test well. Oh, let's see if we can get to the next slide. There we go. All right. So first thing is that we should talk about is just normal exam stress. It is absolutely normal to feel some stress, to feel some anxiety before an exam, because like I mentioned, exams are just inherently stressful situations. And actually having a moderate kind of middle of the road amount of stress can help us do well in stressful situations, particularly like exams or when we have to perform or do presentations, things like that. And if you look at this bell curve here, if we don't really have any stress, and we're not really, our body's not really activated, we're not motivated, we're not really attentive, we're just kind of like bored and just not really doing much of anything. So when we need to perform, when we need to do well, and we have a lot of things going on, it's good for us to have a little bit of stress, that middle kind of moderate level of stress, for us to meet the demands that are going on. Unfortunately, as you can see right there at the top of the bell curve, there is a tipping point. So when our stress levels get so much, when it becomes too much stress, we get overloaded by that stress, especially in a test situation or exam situation, that can make it really hard for us to concentrate and remember everything that we studied. And that's when, test anxiety seems to come into play. So, kind of a broad way to define test anxiety is just like an experience of a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety in a testing situation. And it can be a vicious cycle. So, you can start the exam, maybe you're already feeling anxious or worried, or you have some fear about how you're going to perform. And because that you're so in your head about your worry and anxiety, it's hard for you to concentrate. And then because you can't concentrate, you can't remember what you studied, then you get more anxious, and then your concentration performance just further decline. It really can become the snowball effect. So something that we're going to eventually talk about are hopefully some ways to either prevent that snowball effect from happening, or to disrupt that snowball effect so you can focus on the exam. Okay, so let's just talk about some things that might underlie test anxiety. I have some psychological and behavioral things that can underlie test anxiety. And by no means is it an exhaustive list or anything like that. But these are just some of the common ones. But first, let's talk about the biological part of just stress and anxiety. So this flight or flight system in our body, it's this really kind of amazing thing that our body does when we face a challenging situation or a stressor, or when we're in danger. Our body automatically activates to release all these hormones, adrenaline, so we can really meet that challenge or demand that's going on. So in a test situation, our body releases adrenaline, all these hormones, for our brain to feel more mentally alert, so we can feel prepared to kind of take on that challenge of the test. So sometimes what happens is that when the flight or flight system gets activated, we're in an exam, it's stressful. Sometimes it can get really, really activated and goes past that tipping point that I talked about before. And those symptoms can be really distracting when you're taking an exam. So if you have all this adrenaline pumping through your body, next thing you know, you're shaking, or maybe your muscles feel tense. You might feel nauseous or something like that. And then next thing you know, you're focusing on what's happening in your body and not on the exam, and you get more anxious, and then that snowball effect can happen. Some psychological causes that could be related to test anxiety is having a fear of failure. If you're pinning all of your self-worth, or a big part of how you perceive how much you're worth on how well you do on the exam, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And if you're putting this much pressure on yourself, again, you're probably going to be more focused on that fear that you might not do well, as opposed to actually focusing on the exam. Having negative expectations. Maybe in the past you didn't do so well on a test, or maybe you had a prior experience of test anxiety, and you're already going into a test situation being really anxious and kind of telling yourself, there's no way I'm going to get through this test, there's no way I'm going to do well. And if you're telling yourself that, you're focused on that, and chances are you're not going to do well because that's what you're focused on. And then, just some behavioral things that can cause test anxiety, just not being prepared. Maybe you didn't study, or you didn't do the reading, and you're just going in already worried and anxious because you're not prepared, or even maybe you just didn't study as well as you should have. Okay, so here are some test anxiety symptoms. This is not, an exhaustive list again of what you might experience if you have some test anxiety. And the thing about this, the reason we want to look at some symptoms that happen for test anxiety is because I want you guys to think about like what happens for you, or what has happened for you in the past when you were taking an exam and you realized you were stressed, or you were feeling really distracted, you couldn't concentrate. Hopefully maybe some of these symptoms stick out for you, but hopefully gets you to start thinking about what actually gets in your way when you're taking an exam. And test anxiety and symptoms really, really vary for different people. Some people have mild test anxiety. One of the symptoms here is butterflies in the stomach, right? So maybe they get distracted by having that feeling. They might not do as well on the test, but that still would kind of go in that under the umbrella of test anxiety. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, some people, it can be really debilitating, might even have a panic attack while you're, taking a test. You just can't even engage in the task. So the range is really, really varies, but it's always important for us to be able to identify what's going on for us in a situation so we can do something about it. All right, so what are some things we can do about test anxiety? We're going to go into this. All right, so first thing we're going to talk about is study skills, just practical study skills. This is probably one of the more, I guess, preventative ways to combat test anxiety. We'll go over some test taking techniques that can help improve your test taking ability. We'll talk about some relaxation techniques to help you, moderate your level of stress before and during exam. And then we're going to talk about positive self-talk, because something that's associated with test anxiety is that we tend to have kind of a negative or say negative statements to ourselves and really kind of put ourselves down, and that can trigger anxiety. So we're going to talk about ways we can combat that. All right, so ineffective study techniques. So I want to start with this because I know it was my experience when I was in college. I had no idea how to effectively study. And, I really ran into a lot of trouble with that. And no one really teaches you how to really be an effective studier. So let's go through some of these because I think they're very, very common pitfalls that people fall into. So one of the first things is studying for a long period of time. I know a lot of people think like, oh, I have 2-3 hours, I should just sit down, power through, study. And that's not to say that you won't learn anything or you won't remember all, some of the things that you studied, but actually what's more effective is when we study for shorter periods of time and take a break in between our study time. So studying for about, let's say 30 to 45 minutes and taking a 15-minute break. And the reason why that's more effective is when we're learning, part of our brain that's kind of really active and trying to get this stuff integrated to our long-term memory is something called working memory. And our working memory capacity is very limited. We can only really process so much information at a time. So if you study for shorter periods of time, not only does your brain get the break that it needs to kind of, recuperate and stay attentive, but it also allows yourself to better process the information that you're studying. So again, that's just a more effective way to study. So like I said, if you study for a long period of time, I'm not saying that you won't remember things or that, you won't learn anything if you do that. It's just you're not going to remember or learn as much as you will if you were to effectively study and study for shorter periods of time. These next 2 points, thinking that it's better to study a single subject, again, over long periods of time, or just reviewing one topic, and feeling like you have to master that topic before you move on to the next thing. So this is also just not the most effective way to master a topic and to be able to recall it come the test day. And so what's actually more effective is switching it up. Like if you have an hour or two to study, say for 30 minutes, you're going to study math, and then you take your 15-minute break, and then you're going to go on, study science for 30 minutes, and then you can go back and forth. And why this is more effective is because our brain is really amazing, and it starts to make connections between topics that may not seem related, but our brain still starts to make connections, and it becomes more elaborated. And when information becomes elaborated in our mind, it's better integrated in our long-term memory. And that's what we want, because when information's in our long-term memory, we can hopefully recall it come test day. Highlighting, underlining important concepts in the text. So the reason why this is not the most effective way to study is that we're actually kind of distracted when we're highlighting or just looking for, those key concepts or important concepts, because we're thinking like, okay, I think this one's important, or this is bolded, so maybe I should highlight this, as opposed to really, really focusing on what we're reading. And another part just with highlighting and underlining stuff is that when we go back to review, we're only reading the stuff that we highlighted. And so, the text that's not highlighted helps to connect different concepts to each other. So again, remember I talked about, information becoming more elaborated in our mind, in our brain. We need to be able to have a way to connect concepts together, because the more connected they are, the easier we will be able to recall that information. Reading and just rereading text or just reviewing notes, is not the most effective way to study. And that's because what actually is the most effective is forcing ourselves to remember information, forcing ourselves to recall information. So when we read and reread and just review stuff, it's kind of a passive way of learning. Like, again, you might, be able to remember some stuff. You'll probably, make sure that you probably will learn some things if you just review and review stuff. But again, you're not going to remember as much, and you're not going to learn as much of the information if you force yourself to remember, like, what was it that I just read? And you just take a moment and try to think and try to recall it. And the more you do that, the more you test yourself. You say, like, what was it that I just read? And you go back to read it because maybe you don't remember. The more you do that, the more integrated it becomes in our long-term memory. And then, of course, the easier it's going to be recall when it's test day. Multitasking is a really big one, right? I think a lot of people, feel like they need to have some background noise, or feel that they just want to, like, watch TV and do their work. But unfortunately, our brains, we just can't multitask. It's been shown time and time again what happens when we're doing two tasks at once, and more than one task, is that we're distracted on both fronts. We're distracted watching the TV, and we're distracted when we're studying. So it's really, really important to just focus on your work. And if you are a person that studies or needs some kind of, white noise or some noise in the background, that's okay. I mean, really what it's all about, or what this multitasking is about, is, if you are listening or watching something that has words or lyrics and things like that, your mind's going to be distracted because you're automatically going to be trying to process what those words and everything is saying. So if you're somebody that does need some sound while you're studying, make sure it's like ambient music, like classical music, music that doesn't have any words. That's okay. Cramming the night before or the morning of an exam. So this is actually a really good point, because sleep is actually the best thing you can probably do before an exam for yourself, because when we sleep, information, like all that information you study, starts to get processed, and it starts to be consolidated in our long-term memory. And also your brain gets the rest it needs to feel like, it's rejuvenated and can really, tackle the task of the test. So, if you stay up late or you wake up early and you're not getting your sleep, you're really kind of robbing yourself and your brain the opportunity to process all that stuff you studied already, and to feel like awake and energized for the actual exam. So, really, really try not to cram, and cut your sleep schedule that way. All right, some effective study habits. So I think I touched on some of them when I was describing the ineffective ones, but let's go through some of these. So first things first, establish a study routine. This is really important. I know a lot of you guys have other things going on in your life, work and family and other responsibilities that you have to do. So it's so important to figure out what are times throughout your week that you can dedicate to studying, and stick to it. You have to make studying a priority. I mean, you're going to school. Yes, you have other responsibilities going on, but because you're in school, and this is, I'm assuming, a goal that you have for yourself, you also have to make studying up there with all your other priorities, and figure out times when you can study. It's really, really important. And, just like you would show up for a shift at work, you show up for studying in the same way. If you say 9 o'clock, Monday, Wednesday, Friday is your study time, you show up and you put 100% of your focus in that hour or two, or whatever, however much time you've allotted. Another good thing is trying to create dedicated study areas for yourself, if it's possible. I know it's not possible for everyone. There's not, sometimes we just don't have the space to have a dedicated study area. But the key thing with this point is, sometimes what tends to happen is that we waste time, our study time, trying to get all our stuff together. Where's my book? Where's my notebook? My pens? Blah, blah, blah. And, you don't want to spend 15 minutes trying to figure out, where all your things are out of your study time. You want to make sure you show up and you're prepared for your study time. So if you don't have the space to create a dedicated study area, that's okay. As long as you keep your books or your notebooks in, one spot, and that's, it's always going to be there. That's what's key. So you can just pick up and go and find your place to study. Quality over quantity. So I talked a lot about that in the last slide, right? Effective study habits boils down to quality studying, not, telling yourself or sitting down for long, long periods of times, reviewing things over and over. That's not the most effective way. It's all about making sure that you're studying for shorter periods of time, taking the break you need, and doing some of these other study habits that we're going to move on to right now. Already talked about studying, making sure it's a priority. So when you make your study schedule and you have your study schedule, you're going to show up just like you would show up for work and be dedicated. Set specific, study goals, realistic study goals for yourself for that time. What do you want to get accomplished? And what's really key with this point is make sure the goal that you set for yourself is 100% attainable. If you know you only have an hour dedicated for studying and I don't know, it takes you a while to get through a chapter, like 2 hours to get through a chapter. Don't say you're going to finish a chapter in an hour when you know that's not something that's possible for you. Know your limits, know yourself the best. Say, in this hour, I'm going to get through a quarter of the chapter and do a summary of what I've read. That's something that's doable, that's something that's attainable. And when you achieve that goal, you feel better about yourself. You feel more confident, you feel more motivated. And the more confident and motivated you feel, the more confident and motivated you're going to feel when it comes to test day. Summarize what you read. This is actually a really, really good one. Summarizing what you read and quizzing yourself were, in addition to having a study routine, were some of the top things that worked for me when I was struggling with studying. So when you read something, again, trying to force yourself to remember, if it's, a part in a chapter, just take that break and say, okay, I just read like 2 pages out of this chapter. What did I just read? And it's okay if you don't remember what you just read. Go back, review real quick, and then force yourself to remember again. The more you do that, the more you're going to remember, and the more it's going to be integrated into your long-term memory. And the better, increases the chances of you doing better on test day. Quizzing yourself. I know some textbooks tend to have maybe some quizzes in the back or questions in the back. Use those tools. Quiz yourself on the material. If your textbooks don't have those questions or quizzes and things like that, as you're reading your material, start make questions about the material you just read. And that way you already have a study guide for when it comes time to really bunker down and study for your exam. You already have your quiz questions. You can go through them. You'll start to recognize things that you actually do know. You'll start to recognize things that you don't remember. And this can help you target your studying. That way you're not reviewing all the things all over again. You will be able to recognize it's actually this part of this chapter that I really didn't master. So let me focus more of my time on that. Again, making effective use of your time, especially if you have limited time to study. Always important to take care of your mind and your body. Make sure that you're eating well, that you're getting your sleep, exercising, doing mindfulness, whatever works for you, but making sure that you're taking care of yourself, because our mind and our body always needs rest in order to be able to challenge or take on the challenges that we face every day. And that includes studying and doing the exam. Limit distractions not if you can. I mean, you have to limit distractions because, again, we can't really multitask, right? So do what you can to limit your distractions. If you are, in a house with multiple people and maybe it might be loud, if you can, just have earplugs, or we talked about maybe listening to ambient music before. If you can talk with your housemates and say, hey, I just moved from this time to this time. I just really need some time to just be able to study. Try to have these conversations with the people that you live with. All right, so let's move on to some test taking habits that will really be good. So I talked about sleep before. Sleep is so important. So before the exam, try to get at least 8 hours of sleep, at least 2 nights before the exam. So not just the night before. Actually, it's probably best if you can do it for a couple of nights, not just 2, but at least 2 nights before the exam. So your brain is getting the rest that it needs, and your brain is able to consolidate and process all that stuff you've been studying, and you can feel ready to tackle the exam. Again, make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You're eating, you're hydrating well. Avoid caffeine. Caffeine can induce symptoms of anxiety. So if you're already somebody that's, prone to anxiety, you're prone to stress, the last thing you want to do is, make your chances of having a full-blown, test anxiety situation happen. So try to avoid caffeine. Don't study right before the exam. I know it might seem like it would be helpful to just review maybe some notes or even quiz questions or something like that before the exam. But what happens sometimes is that it can kind of psych us out. If there's like one question that we, out of 10 even, that we just didn't remember, then we start to doubt ourselves. So you don't want to psych yourself out before the exam. Make sure you have some time to get comfortable. Make sure you have all your paper, your pencils, all those things. Even you can even do some relaxation techniques before the exam to really, get centered and focused. Try not to discuss the exam with other students. What happens also with that is that you can psych yourself out again. Some students also might be, dealing with their own issues in terms of testing and anxiety, and that might put that on, they might put that anxiety onto you. Some student might mention one term or concept that maybe you're like, wait, I don't exactly remember that. And next thing you know, you're anxious. So try to just, make sure you're getting the sleep you need. You're making sure you're taking care of yourself, and you just, take the time that you need to yourself to get ready and focus for the exam. All right, some other test taking strategies that can be really effective. Do a memory dump. And so what that is right when the test starts, write down all the concepts or equations or whatever it is that you remember that might be helpful for throughout the test. That way you already have an information bank for yourself. That way you can refer to it, and you don't have to necessarily keep all that stuff in your mind. Scan the test, and try to look at, how many questions there are, how many multiple choice, if there's short answer. Try to think of like, how much time you can and can't spend on different parts of the test. Start with easy questions. This one's actually really important for test anxiety, because part of what happens is that you start to doubt yourself when you get anxious in a test situation. So if you start with the easy questions as you're going through the test, and the more that you answer, the more confident you're going to feel, the less less you're going to feel, less anxiety you'll feel. And hopefully, because you're not as anxious, you're able to access all that information that you did study. Of course, make sure you mark the questions that you're not sure about, or that were really confusing or difficult, so you can go back to them. And another, actually, just to add with that strategy, sometimes what happens is as you're going through the test and you see questions that you're not sure about, or they seem really difficult, there's sometimes what happens is that later on in the test that there are questions or answers that actually inform the questions that you weren't so sure about before. So that can also be really helpful too. Make sure you read the instructions, questions very carefully. This is kind of, basic test taking strategy. Sometimes, like with multiple choice, like if you read the questions really carefully, the grammar can give away what the answer is. So that's always going to be very important with test taking. Take your best guess. If you're not sure, even if the answers you're not sure if you saw these answers ever before, just take your best guess, because chances are that guess that you take is going to be the correct guess. And sometimes what happens, even we're not sure about, a question, or it seems like there's always going to be curveballs on tests too. What happens sometimes is our brain starts, does make these connections between concepts when you're reviewing things or you're quizzing yourself. And sometimes what happens is that we might not be able to explicitly recall a certain topic, but our brain is still giving us signals like, hey, this answer looks familiar. We know this somehow. And that's probably what your brain is trying to tell you, like, hey, that's the right answer. So take your best guess. If you're somebody that goes blank on a test, write down everything that you can remember, even if it seems like gibberish. Just start writing anything down, because that can clear up the log jam that can happen when you get really, really anxious. Check your work, but only change answers that you feel strongly about. Like you knew you made a mistake on that question, and you can change that answer. Because when you take your best guess, typically that first guess, that first answer you chose is going to be the right answer. So don't change your answers if you're not sure about which one's the right one. Okay, so we're going to talk about some relaxation techniques that you can do during an exam if it turns out that you got really anxious and you just need to calm down, or get your stress levels to be a little bit lower. And so the techniques, relaxation techniques, what they do is they trigger something called the relaxation response, and this basically counteracts that flight or flight response system that we talked about before that makes you feel anxious and stressed. And what it does, it really puts the brain and the body at rest, and can really lower all those symptoms that come up when we're feeling stressed and anxious. And this is something that would be, for the best results, to try to regularly practice. So one of the most common ones is doing deep breathing. What deep breathing does, it slows your heart rate, it lowers your blood pressure, helps you get all the oxygen throughout your body. It really triggers that relaxation response. It can distract you from those negative thoughts that might be happening when you're getting anxious. And it's super discreet. Like no one has to know that you're doing it during a test, right? And this can be really helpful to do right before the exam starts. There are many, many techniques, deep breathing techniques out there. You can Google and come up with a lot of results. But I like box breathing because it's probably like one of the simplest techniques out there. And all you have to remember is there are 4 steps and you count everything to the count of 4, right? So you breathe in through your nose through the count of 4, you hold your breath to the count of 4, and then exhale through your mouth to the count of 4, and then you hold it to the count of 4. And it's super simple. You can repeat this a couple of times for 2-3 minutes, and then that will trigger the relaxation response and hopefully get your stress levels to that sweet spot to help you really do well on the test. Another relaxation technique is the tensing and differential relaxation technique. And what this does, you're forcing yourself to tense your whole body and then suddenly relax your body for a couple of seconds. And what this technique does is as you physically relax all of your muscles, when our body is physically relaxed, we can't really feel as anxious or stressed. So when you do this a couple of times and your muscles feel relaxed, it triggers that relaxation response and helps to lower your stress levels. Okay, so let's talk about self-talk. So what this is, it's basically statements that we say to ourselves. And negative self-talk tends to be things that we're saying to ourselves either before or during the test. Like if we're focused on, the fact that, there's no way we're going to do well. How can't why didn't I remember this answer? Why can't I think of this question? When we're really, really doubting that ourselves in a testing situation, that's going to lead to anxiety. It takes up a lot of mental energy as well. And it makes it really hard to concentrate if all we're focused on is these negative things that we tend to say to ourselves in these situations. And I just want to highlight that this happens automatically. It's not, necessarily something that we're aware of, that we're putting ourselves down and that we're causing our anxiety. It can just be sometimes that it just happens and we're not even really aware that it's happening. So, a reason that we're talking, or I wanted to talk about this, is to highlight that this does happen and that there's something we can do to get to, so we're not engaging in negative self-talk as much. So positive self-talk, as you can imagine, is the opposite of negative self-talk, and it's positive, realistic statements that we say to ourselves. And this, when we practice these positive, realistic statements that we can say to ourselves about our ability, our test-taking ability, our ability to study, that's going to help us feel better about. Is going to help us feel better and more confident when we go into a testing situation. So the thing about self-talk, it does require some time and reflection, really thinking about like, when I did get anxious the last time, or I was really distracted, like, what was I thinking? What thoughts were coming to my mind? And it's, sometimes that's really hard to do. Maybe you can't recall those thoughts that came up for you, and that's okay. But what you want to do is to really try to, for yourself, to just come up with some positive statements that can replace negative statements when you start to recognize like, oh gosh, like I am thinking in a negative way right now. So some rules to writing a positive statement: use the first person tense. Don't use any negatives in the statement. You want to make sure that this is a positive statement about yourself and your realistic abilities that you have. And I want to highlight the realistic belief, because we can actually put pressure on ourselves if we make an unrealistic statement. Excuse me. So the example here, as opposed to saying, I'm going to make an A on this test, saying that you're going to pass this test. If you know that this is a really difficult subject and you haven't done well on the test before, and you know that, you have some difficulty testing, if you make a statement, or the statement that you practice, that you're going to make an A on this test, that actually puts pressure on yourself. So you want to make sure that the statements that you make for yourself are going to be realistic, and that it doesn't make you feel any more pressure. So once you come up with some positive statements for yourself, make sure you're repeating them to yourself. You're practicing them. You have them you write them down, and you have them somewhere readily available on your phone. You write it on a paper, put it in your wallet, on your wall, wherever that is readily available. Even when you start a test, you can write them down really quickly so you can refer to them if you start to feel, anxious, or you start to recognize that you're thinking in a negative way. All right, so these are just some examples, negative self-talk versus positive self-talk. There's like two that I really like that kind of show the difference. So first one, no matter what I do, I will not pass this course. As opposed to, I'm prepared for this test and I will do the best that I can. C, I cannot remember the answers, or I've forgotten how to do the problems. I'm going to fail this test. I went blank on the last test, but now I know how to reduce my test anxiety. So these are just some examples, some good examples of how you can reframe some negative statements that you say to yourself into positive statements. Okay, so it might happen for some people that when you're in the test, or you're taking a test, or you're in a situation that you have to really perform, that you start feeling overwhelmed by all the negative statements that you might be saying to yourself, and it might be really difficult to kind of just like practice your positive statements and to do relaxation. So something you can do is called thought stopping. And what this is basically you stop the negative self-talk that you're doing by a verbal interruption. So say you're thinking like, oh, there's no way I'm going to pass this test. I'm absolutely going to fail. How can I do this? And then you recognize what's going on. And you say, stop. And you stop those thoughts in its tracks. And then what you do is you start to use your positive statements. You start to replace it with positive statements. And, you can do some relaxation techniques in addition to that to really help center yourself and get you back on track so you can focus at the task at hand, whether that's a presentation or a test or whatever it is. And I just want to highlight that this is only a short-term solution. What works in the long run is really being able to identify what are these negative statements that you're saying to yourself, and really trying to reframe them in a more healthy and adaptive way. Okay, so before we get to our Q&A, I just want to do a quick overview of like all the things that I talked about today. So, having some stress, being nervous, being anxious before a test, that is absolutely normal. But, and it can actually help us, when we have that moderate level of stress. But obviously, when we go past that tipping point, when it's too much, that's when test anxiety starts to come into play, and that impacts our performance. Practical skills are always going to be key to improving test anxiety, making sure you're studying effectively, making sure you actually prepare for the test, that you're, maybe using some of those test taking skills to improve your test taking ability. Use relaxation techniques before or during the test, to make sure that you're moderating your level of stress, to make sure you're staying as focused as you can be. And then, like I mentioned before, in the long run, what's always going to be the most effective is identifying those negative statements that you're making about yourself and your test taking abilities, and replacing them with those positive statements and practicing them as much as you can. And if it happens for you, it's possible that you might start to get overwhelmed by the negative self-talk during a test, or when you're having to do something and perform. Just use thought stopping, stop those thoughts in their tracks, and start to recenter yourself, use relaxation techniques, use your positive self-talk statements that you came up with. Okay, so obviously I talked a lot about, all the things that you can do for yourself to improve your ability to work on your test anxiety. But, we always need help. We all need help at times. And it's always important to know when it might be time for you to reach out for help. These are just some situations where it might be a good idea to reach out for help. Again, not an exhaustive list of the only times that you should reach out for help. You know yourself the best, and if you know that maybe you're struggling a little bit more than you need some extra help, please reach out to us here at Counseling Services. We are here for you guys. We want you guys to succeed. And just schedule a consultation with us. You can email us, and we'll do all that we can to meet your needs. All right, so that is my presentation, and I guess we can move on to, if there's any questions.
I was muted. Thank you so much, Tashel, for all of this great information. These are great techniques to use, and we might even talk in the Q&A. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now. So if anyone has them, feel free to put them in. And in the meantime, I wanted to actually share. So there were some students who expressed interest in attending this webinar, but who were not able to because of the time or the day.
Yeah.
A recording, we're going to be having a recording of this meeting that we made, so that you can return to it if you want to remember any of the techniques that Tashel has discussed. You can watch it online. But some of the students who expressed interest in attending but couldn't, also, when they were communicating with me about it, noted some things that they were hoping to learn. And one of those questions I thought was, I'm going to pose it because I think it's going to be useful to everyone here. Someone wrote and said, I don't actually have too much of a problem with exams, but I do have a problem with other academic tasks sometimes, like public speaking.
Mm,
When I like when I want to speak in class, when I and someone else actually mentioned discussion posts, like moments when a person kind of has to move forward and like highlight their own view. That they mentioned kind of like we can get really anxious in those moments, like reading over our discussion post for 20 minutes before being able
right,
to
right.
press like post. And basically I would classify me as a clinician, I would put all of those things in the category of performance anxieties. So
Yeah,
they're all moments when you are encountering a lot of friction in your kind of like interface, both with your academics and how you're going to be viewed by others. And I thought, you share with us what you think, Tashel, but it seems to me that many of these techniques are applicable across performance domains. And if you wouldn't
yeah.
mind talking a little bit about that, that'd be cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I would imagine maybe like more of the study techniques and things like that, not as applicable, might not apply as much. But I think something that goes with performance anxiety, just like we talked about with test anxiety, is just the underlying kind of feeling
Yeah.
of, just like you just get so stressed and so anxious and so in your head. And I think the best way to kind of get out of that, to get out of your head and to lower your stress, is to one, recognize that it's happening, right? That's step number one. And then when you recognize when it's happening, there's things you can do to lower your stress levels. Like we talked about some relaxation techniques, right? We talked about maybe using some positive statements, saying positive statements to yourself. If it's a discussion post, saying, I read the material, I edited my comment, and, I'm going to, do the best I can with this post. Making sure it's a realistic statement that you're saying to yourself. Because I would imagine that part of what happens, especially with presentations and discussion posts, is that, you're putting yourself down and you're thinking like, what if people are probably not going to respond, or people might have negative things to say about what I'm doing. And, I don't know what I'm saying. If you're putting yourself down, of course you're going to feel anxious. Of course you're going to spend 20 minutes longer than you need to on the task. So I think, what we talked about today, I think what would be most helpful in terms of just performance anxiety in general is really figuring out like what you're saying to yourself. And even if you can't figure that out, is making the effort to make sure that you have positive statements that you're saying to yourself so you can feel better and feel more confident in your ability, just so you can get the task done. Because, you probably have studied, or you practice your presentation and you read and you know your things, and it's all about, just telling yourself like you did that and you can do this. So that I think that would be
Yeah.
what we talked about, kind of like one of some of the more helpful things for getting.
What I loved about your test taking strategies, the effective ones that you put forward also, is that so many of them had to do with rehearsal.
Yes,
Like
yes,
rehearse retrieval. Essentially, like if you are going to have to produce a fact on a test,
right,
practice actually producing the fact,
exactly.
in your
Yeah,
practice. That can be really, really useful for things like making presentations in class.
yes,
Rehearsal, like give
right.
yourself the opportunity to practice it. So I loved those rehearsal focus. I thought they really got to some of the questions that some of our people who are going to be watching the recording are going to want to know. Um, and I think I think that I'm just trying to think if there were any other questions that kind of came in from folks who planned to watch. There was the speaking in class, performance. Yeah, and I see no questions in the Q&A, so we're good to stop if nobody has any questions. What I do want to put out there is that if you realize after you've taken in all this information that you have questions, you can always follow up with us at counseling. We're happy to help you think through these things. So just pose your thoughts and questions anytime.
Yes.
And the other thing that I will say is, like, we are here for you generally, whether you are struggling with test anxiety or whether you're struggling with anything else or not struggling, but just want to think about something. You just got stuff on your mind, you want to bounce it off somebody. That's life. The fact that you might be having those experiences are signs that you are living an active and full life, and we want that. And we all need spaces to talk over all the active things that we have going on. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with anything you want. We're here to think through what type of conversation would help you think that through in the best way. Tashel, I want to thank you for presenting all of this information. It was nice to see folks joining our little room today, and please be on the lookout for recordings and future events. We look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye and have a nice
Bye, guys.